Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Leigh Fitzpatrick Snead. She's the author of Infertile but Fruitful, Finding Fulfillment When You Can't Conceive. And for many of you who listen to this program, you know full well that my own personal story with my bride involves such a situation, and therefore this book, when it was brought to our attention, was something that was so near and dear to my heart, and undoubtedly many of you listeners as well who have called in and shared. And so I thought this would be an important conversation. Leigh is a fellow for the Catholic Association and co-host of the nationally syndicated radio show Conversations with Consequence, author of Infertile but Fruitful, Finding Fulfillment When You Can't Conceive, writer, editor, speaker, and mother of four, whose work engages questions of pop culture, motherhood, family, and the church. Leigh, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very well. Thank you for having me on.
I'm very, very glad to be able to speak with you about this. I want to begin by, I read the book, and so I want to give you the room to just share the story that prompted the need to write this book.
Sure. It was, at this point, I think it was a few years ago, maybe 3. I wrote an article for the National Catholic Register during Infertility Awareness Week. I also wrote one around Mother's Day. And those were like my first sort of tiptoeing into the professional infertility mode, because I obviously had personally been infertile for a long time, but I hadn't really talked about it. As you know, it's very personal. It's like the most personal part of your life. But then I got such a positive, like voluminous response to both of those pieces. A lot of DMs. This helped me. I was up in the middle of the night, and actually this story is really great because it's a 2-part good. I was up in the middle of the night. My wife is so sad. We haven't been able to conceive. I was just Googling, and I found this letter, and it helped me. This was an email to my husband, and he saw this person who read it saw my last name, realized he had been a student of my husband's. And that's created like a beautiful, like sort of post student-teacher relationship, friendship after that, because I think, again, you'll probably know this too, that sometimes men are overlooked in this. But anyway, the response was really big. A lot of people DM'd me, people I knew, people I didn't know. Priests were like, I'm going to save these articles because people come to me. Sometimes I don't know what to do. I can at least start by sharing this with them. And then I had a mentor who said, hey, I think this is your book. And Sophia seemed to think so too, Sophia Institute Press, and so here we are.
Well, like I said, I'm really glad you penned the book, and it's a tremendously accessible read, and like you mentioned, it's deeply personal. And since you brought it up, maybe that might be a good place to start before we dive into the content of your book. You mentioned how men experience this, and in my experience, it's almost as if men are expected to not feel it and not talk about it. And frankly, even for me, my whole drive has been to be strong for my bride.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that it was tearing us up inside, both of us.
Yeah, and you want to protect her, and you want to do whatever it takes to make sure that she's okay, and that's so beautiful. And I actually have to say, I'm just tickled to death by the fact that you call her your bride, because my husband does the same thing. Every time he reposts an article, he was like, here's the latest from the bride. So anyway, I love that. And yeah, I think so. And that's why I was so happy. The section, where I have other people's stories, I had cast kind of a wide net, because you sort of, I don't know if you've found this to be true, but you kind of pick up, a posse of fellow infertile people, like along the way. You meet people, you have a special rapport. You can talk about things that like only you guys really understand. You can talk in shorthand. And I have found a really wonderful, like supportive stable of these dear friendships. And I asked 8 or 9 of them if they'd be willing to share some or part of their own stories for my own book, because I wanted sort of different flavors of infertility represented, not just my own experience. And what was really interesting was that only 3 were able to answer the questions I asked, because some of them, it was too painful to revisit, or maybe they had never actually dealt with them themselves, but that's a side point. The point is that 2 of them talk explicitly about their husbands and what it takes to, the reminders to women that he suffers too. And especially, one AB, she wanted to be anonymous because it's so private. She talks about, they experienced male factor infertility. And again, I think there's an assumption out there that it's twofold, that it's usually the woman, because it's the woman who isn't pregnant. So that's sort of the obvious thing. And then also, I think, all this sort of it's not contemporary bro culture, but this sort of hyper masculinity thing, like it's just a medical diagnosis, but I think people really feel emasculated by that. And I think that's why I felt like less of a woman when I was going through it. I mean, I think it really gets at the heart of so many things about yourself. But I do think as little as people talk about the female experience of infertility, it's less with men. And also I think, as Catholics, it's the couple that has it. But I think also, I think that your instincts to protect and care for your wife, the bride, are the same for everyone else. I think that it's more comfortable to reach out to the woman in the infertile couple for them. Women, I think, you mother them, they mother you back. I don't know. I think it's less common for people to know how to reach out and comfort the man in the couple. I don't know. It's all anecdotal. I'm not an anthropologist or anything, but you could probably have some insights on that too.
No, I appreciate you speaking into it in that way, especially from the perspective of a bride. And because of that, I'll share briefly. For us, it was, we got married, and before marriage, you don't know what you don't know, because you've never been with each other, right? And so you're figuring all of these things out for the first time, and then a year goes by, and then 2 years go by, and you start really asking questions because you don't know what's wrong.
Right? Almost like, are we doing it right?
Yes.
This was supposed to be easy,
because, I taught high school for a while, and in my short career teaching high school, these teenagers were without any effort, right? And so we're looking at each other going, what are we doing wrong?
Yeah. No, I know. And there was a time when it just was drilled. I went to public school, and it just drilled into you that unintentional pregnancy was everywhere, out to get you. So the idea that it would be possible to, just go for it and have you not get pregnant was, crazy. And then, again, you don't know what to do with it because everything's new. You're still figuring it out. I mean, my husband and I were really young. We'd known each other since we were even younger, but we were still, kids. And all of a sudden, I remember thinking but we just seem fertile. That was my
yes.
We look fertile. I feel fertile. And obviously that means nothing, but I think when it really turns all your presuppositions about what your future is going to be upends them. And I think that's the big part that I think people don't understand, because that's what leads people to be just adopt. As if it's that easy, or maybe, or as if you haven't heard of adoption before, or you should get this test, or you should I got it, and again, people want to help, but again, if you haven't walked through it or walked along somebody who's done it, it's really hard to understand how just destabilizing it is to a marriage, to your future, to what your plans were, even it can affect your career plans, schooling plans, everything, Yeah, I mean, No,
I completely understand. I am talking with Leigh Snead. She's the author of Infertile but Fruitful. She's also the radio host of the nationally syndicated program, Conversations with Consequence. And this book, Infertile but Fruitful, it really is an amazing, simple, heartfelt take on a largely unspoken struggle. And that's why we're having this conversation on this program today. It is published by Sophia Institute Press. Do procure a copy of it and have this conversation. I think we ought to change the stigma around this conversation. We're continuing on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Leigh Snead, the author of Infertile but Fruitful, Finding Fulfillment When You Can't Conceive. So your first chapter, that's so funny because back in middle school, you hear first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes so-and-so pushing baby carriage. And I think we've created a bit of a social structure, like you mentioned, of accidental pregnancies and easy pregnancies.
Yeah.
And I want to invite you to speak to that social mindset and how that impacts and affects families, young couples who are having legitimate struggles today with conceiving and having children.
Yeah, I do think that that's, especially when you are in sort of a really vibrant Catholic community, the focus on, chastity and marriage and, the procreative and the unitive, and there's, large families at Mass, and there's just so much. If you see it, you want it. What we need to do is we need to be able to talk. I mean, it's funny because I say this sometimes, and then I think, do we really want to talk about it as much? Women talk about their pregnancy and birth stories for years, decades even, as if they had just happened. And it would be nice if there was that sort of freedom to talk about your infertility story too, in like groups of women or wherever you might have that conversation. But I think there's such a strain. People, I think, sometimes even think it might be catching. Like I think people, that there's jokes about like divorce being catching or something, and they don't want to talk about it. They're uncomfortable, and I think that they don't ever sort of really ask you questions, or they ask you really invasive questions. And so I think this takes practice. The more we talk about it, the more we have a common vernacular, the more we understand that everyone has crosses. I mean, you can see the tired looks on these faces of some of these people who really do just look across the room at one another and are having another baby. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's number 8, 9, 10. And while every baby is a gift, there's still that mental load. Maybe you really are struggling financially, or it's just your body's going to be tired at that point. You've gestated all this wonderful life, but that's depleting. And I think if we have that sort of reciprocal understanding that even in this narrow category of, fertility, child rearing, marriage, that there are crosses that we all bear, and to be understanding of that on both sides. And to just understand that, not that it's, we always say like a normal person, a normal couple gets pregnant within like the first year, say. We use that word normal, but it's true. Some people are just infertile. I did naprotechnology. Mm-hmm. It didn't work for me. It doesn't always work. But anyway, my very long-winded point is that there are infertile people, and that's normal too. Mm-hmm. Sort of, you draw a short straw, but I think it just shouldn't be this weird sort of scary thing for everyone. People shouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed if they are infertile, because sometimes that just happens, and they should feel free to talk about it. And then other people should sort of move beyond that initial discomfort, because people don't like to talk about sad things or uncomfortable ideas. But I think if everyone just sort of relaxed, and if someone's talking about it, they're probably ready to talk about it. And it's just, I think, let that infertile person take the lead. And also, I know sometimes, especially when you're experiencing infertility, it can be really hard to understand people being like shocked and surprised and kind of worried about another pregnancy, because it's all you want in the entire world. Again, I think if we like that word reciprocal again, like if we just understand that everyone's got their crosses to bear, I think that would facilitate these conversations, and people wouldn't be suffering so often in silence.
One of the things you highlight is that infertility looks different for every couple.
Yeah.
Like for us, the first 2 years of not conceiving, we didn't, like you said, didn't know what we didn't know. And then we saw a myriad of doctors and figured out that we had first physiological issues. Then we learned we had chemical issues.
Yeah.
And then we found out that there were friends who had completely separate issues, but they were dealing with infertility too. And we know a few couples and completely diverse issues. Can you please speak to the fact that maybe it's because of medical advancements that we know the details now, but at the same time, just speak to the fact that it looks different for different couples, but it's a real cross, and it seems to be a very widespread cross today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the big differences is that, and I think I used to be a little more harsh because I was kind of always nurturing a little pity party for myself. When somebody who married much older, say like late 30s or early 40s, would be like, oh, we're experiencing infertility. Sometimes I would have like a trigger reaction. You're just old. Like that's not the same as me. As me, it was really bad for me. But it's because I was in my 20s. But I've just grown. I mean, writing this book was wonderful. Talking more about it, sharing the stories, hearing more stories. I really have become like totally ashamed that I ever like had those sort of feelings, and even if I hopefully didn't say them out loud, because I think that idea that, especially when you know people who in their late 30s, early 40s have been pregnant. They've likely been pregnant before, but I mean, it's not an impossibility. And I certainly hoped I just turned 50 this past summer, and it was only recently, really, that I was able to say to myself and say out loud, I am never going to be pregnant. And so just because I started in my 20s doesn't mean that hope, went away after, didn't have an expiration date. And so I think, especially if you've been single and you've had this vocation to marriage, and then you finally get that, and then it's like one more mountain to traverse. I just think that it's the same. And so you have that. You have male factor infertility. You have people who maybe tried, like really, who contracepted and then are experiencing it and have, because the temptation and the, normalized thing out there is to contracept everybody. So many people are doing it. The IUD, birth control pills, even Catholics who kind of know better feel like I can make my own medical decisions, and isn't avoiding your fertile period the same as, just taking a chemical, whatever. Anyway, there's lots of like everything. You can always rationalize these things. But so if you've done that, and then you go off that birth control, and then you can't get pregnant. The regret you must feel, and like all these wasted years, because you think, wow, if we caught it earlier, then there's more time to fix it with your natural fertility. I just think there are people, there are people who are called or open to adoption, and then there are some infertile people who aren't. And I think that a lot of times we don't know what to do with those people, because, we think, oh, they wanted to be parents so badly. Here's a different way to become a parent. But I've really grown an appreciation for my friends who are married, experienced infertility, but weren't called to adopt. And I think, but they also express, like, sometimes they really do feel people don't quite know what to do with them. And they feel left out of some socializing, especially like in a parish. It's so much family-oriented things. But they really have had to work hard to sort of carve out a spot for them.
In that whole milieu of working hard to carve out that space, I think one thing that I've seen is the church has begun really acknowledging that this is a part of the cross that her children carry. Like me and my bride too, we try to be very public. In fact, after losing our first two, one of the things we committed was we were determined to talk about it. We've got about a minute left. I want to invite you to speak to the hearts of people listening.
This won't kill you. You might feel like it will, but it won't. And if you look around, you'll see the many fruits that people bear. Celibate people are called to be fruitful. Older people who are past the pregnancy stage are still called to be fruitful. It's not a box you check, and we should really not reduce our innate nature as mothers and our call to be fruitful to only babies, because there are so many fruits that we can bear. And I really think sometimes, for me, one thing I did which really helped me was I was so pleased that I had my husband and relied on him so much during those infertile years, intensive. And I always would offer up my suffering to women for prayers, like to find a husband, women who really wanted to find a husband, because again, everyone has their cross, and to sort of connect with that, I think, lightens your own load.
Leigh, tremendous joy and an honor. I'm looking forward to future conversations. God bless you. My guest has been Leigh Snead. She's the author of an amazing book, Infertile but Fruitful, Finding Fulfillment When You Can't Conceive. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.